My mother-in-law is a warm-hearted person. My neighbor is pregnant and still going to work. My mother-in-law asked me, who is still in confinement, to get up 2 hours earlier and cross districts to give her a ride. However, due to my mother-in-law's negligence in taking care of my baby accidentally got sick and died. I became even more depressed after giving birth, but my mother-in-law still forced me to breastfeed my neighbor's baby. When the neighbor's baby got sick and was hospitalized, she and the neighbor blamed me together, saying there was a problem with my breast milk. The neighbor's husband even beat me up because of the high medical expenses. When I resisted, he pushed me down the stairs in a rage and I died. My mother-in-law urged my husband to issue a letter of understanding and forgave the neighbor. The car under my name was generously given to the neighbor by my mother-in-law. When I opened my eyes again, I returned to the day when my neighbor came to ask me to breastfeed. I didn't want to trouble Sister Serafina at first, but Jonathan is still young. It's so pitiful that he doesn't have breast milk to eat. The voice of my neighbor Isabella came from the living room. Lying in bed, I was a bit dazed. I actually returned to the day when Isabella came to ask me to help breastfeed. In my previous life, after giving birth to my daughter, I suffered from mild postpartum depression and extremely needed someone to take care of me. However, my mother-in-law was busy running around at the neighbor's house. She even scolded me for being pretentious, strange, and sick. Before taking a nap, I asked my mother-in-law to watch the baby for me. When I woke up, the baby was sent to the hospital. It was said that he had a sudden illness and died not long after. I was extremely grief-stricken, and my postpartum depression became even more serious. The neighbor gave birth around the same time as me, but she had very little breast milk. After knowing that I still had breast milk, she asked if I could help feed her child. I was originally unwilling, but was forced by my mother-in-law to agree. I breastfed the little baby every day and eventually lost my life. Thinking of this, I shivered all over. At this time, my mother-in-law's voice also came over, "No trouble at all. We are neighbors. We will definitely help with such a small favor. Serafina doesn't do anything at home anyway. She just eats and sleeps and eats. She has plenty of breast milk. I guarantee that she will feed your little one full." Seeing that my mother-in-law readily agreed, Isabella flattered and praised, "Serafina's mother-in-law, you are so warm-hearted and helpful. We younger generations should all learn from you." My mother-in-law happily laughed. The laughter was sharp and piercing, full of self-satisfied pleasure. My mother-in-law is a very warm-hearted person. People can ask her for anything they lack. My cosmetics, clothes, and jewelry are often given away by her. I told her that I still need to use those things. She put on a straight face and educated me. One should know how to help others. Anyway, you buy so many things that you can't use them all up. I couldn't get used to the food cooked by my mother-in-law, so I had to cook by myself when I was pregnant. The ingredients I bought were not cheap either. Not only did my father-in-law and mother-in-law eat with me, but they also asked Isabella to come and eat. Because it was expensive, I didn't buy much in quantity. Isabella had a big appetite and ate quickly. After a few bites, she ate most of it. I privately told my mother-in-law that the ingredients were very expensive and I didn't get to eat much. My mother-in-law curled her lips and said in disgust, "It's just a few mouthfuls of food. Do you need to be so fussy about it? The family tradition of our family is to be helpful. You've been married into our family for several years. How come you are still so selfish? When my son wanted to marry you, I thought your moral character wasn't good enough. I thought you could gradually change after entering our family. I didn't expect you to still be like this. I really don't know how your family taught you." In my previous life, my mother-in-law often gave away other people's things generously and often forced me to do things I didn't want to do. She not only killed my child but also caused me to lose my life. In this life, those who have harmed us must pay the price. The bedroom door was pushed open with a bang. My mother-in-law shouted loudly, "Sleep, sleep, sleep. You're as fat as a pig and still sleep every day." She suddenly lifted my quilt. The cold air rushed towards me, making me shiver. "I see you still have breast milk. Isabella's little baby doesn't have breast milk to eat. Go and feed him. When he is hungry, you have to feed her immediately. I looked at them expressionlessly and said coldly, I won't breastfeed. Isabella put on a fake smile. Sister Serafina, this is not like the style of Serafina's mother-in-law's family. Serafina's mother-in-law is so kind-hearted. You are a bit unfeeling like this. My mother-in-law put on a straight face and said in a reprimanding tone, Serafina, why are you so cold? Isabella's little baby is so young and doesn't have milk to eat. Don't you have any sympathy? It's simply unreasonable. If there is no breast milk, just eat formula. No, our baby must be breastfed. Only breast milk can make him healthy. Isabella immediately interrupted me. She took out a bag and said to me, Sister Serafina, look, I spent a lot of money to buy good things for you. Eating this can not only improve the quality of breast milk but also beautify and nourish the skin. While saying this, she moved closer to me with the bag. A smell of urine came over. I knew it was a bunch of dead centipedes, toads, and various insects mixed together. In my previous life, she asked my mother-in-law to boil these together with baby urine and forced me to drink it. That disgusting smell seemed to penetrate time and space and once again flooded my taste buds, making my stomach start to feel sour and nauseous. The painful memory burned my brain. I quickly got up and gave Isabella a hard slap. I dragged the bag over and forcefully put the bag over Isabella's head. A scream rang out. Isabella's head was covered with a bunch of insects. Stinky and bloody water flowed down from her head. It flowed into her eyes, nostrils, and mouth. Isabella screamed in collapse and grabbed the bloody thing on her head and threw it at my face. I quickly pulled my mother-in-law over and stood in front of me. That pile of things just happened to be thrown into my mother-in-law's mouth. Hey, it's quite accurate. Serafina, are you sick? While scolding me, my mother-in-law frantically spit out the things in her mouth. I was so happy that I chuckled. Yes, I am sick. Isn't it written on the diagnosis? Do you want to see it? Only then did mother-in-law and Isabella remember that I was really sick. Then you can't hit people either. I looked at them innocently, with a smile on my face. I can't control myself either. Whoever makes me unhappy, I just want to hit people. Looking at their increasingly dark faces, I said cheerfully, it's okay. I'll save my strength and won't beat you to death. This is nothing. You will have a hard time in the future. I thought the breastfeeding incident was over. Unexpectedly, Isabella came to find my mother-in-law again. Standing next to her was my father-in-law who was about to go out to play mahjong. Jonathan can't get milk and cries all night long. He cries so much that he's about to faint. As mothers, can't you be more considerate of me? Serafina's mother-in-law, your family loves to be helpful. Your daughter-in-law is too cold-blooded. She is nothing like your Ashton family. Isabella pretended to wail while looking at me sideways. My mother-in-law gave me a dissatisfied look and said sarcastically, she is worthy of being a mother. She didn't even raise her own child. If I say so, it's all retribution. If people are not kind, heaven will punish you. Don't worry, Serafina will help you feed. If she doesn't feed with her breast milk, she still has to squeeze it out. Obviously you have helped her. How can she be so ungrateful? Outside lactation consultants are very expensive to squeeze milk once. If she knows how to be grateful, she should give you money. My father-in-law nodded straight beside. Mother-in-law knows what words can pierce my heart. I was directly furious. If you want to feed, you feed yourself. Mother-in-law, haven't you reached menopause yet? Work hard with father-in-law and have another one. It will be just right to help with breastfeeding. Mother-in-law was so ashamed and angry that she stuck out her neck and scolded me. What nonsense are you talking? You are something that has a mother but no upbringing. I raised my volume even more. Aren't you fond of helping others? Go and help in person. Use my things to do favors. Can you be a bit more shameless? Our quarrel attracted the attention of other neighbors around. Some people couldn't help but open the door to watch the show. Mother-in-law's face changed slightly, but she was still stubborn. What's yours and mine? Since you have married into our family, your things are ours. Before I could say anything, Beatrice suddenly interrupted. Oh, Serafina, why are you talking to your mother-in-law like this? Your mother-in-law is such a good person. She is generous to neighbors. In the whole community, everyone who mentions your mother-in-law will give a thumbs up. Mother-in-law stood there, looking at me smugly, enjoying the neighbors praising her and helping her scold me. You said you are also a college graduate. Didn't the teacher teach you to be helpful? Where did you learn your knowledge? You have been neighbors with Isabella for so many years. Helping with a little favor is an easy thing. Your little baby died early. Helping other people's little baby is also accumulating merit for your dead little baby. I was speechless and painful inside. I rolled my eyes a few times and said with a half smile, Beatrice is so generous. Didn't your daughter-in-law just give birth? Let your daughter-in-law come and feed. Yesterday Isabella said that she was out of toilet paper and shampoo and wanted to use ours. If you are generous, you can give it to her. Now everyone is not happy. Beatrice pursed her lips, and the fat on her face trembled. With a fake smile, she said, my grandson also needs to eat. How can I give it to others? If you want to eat, go find your mother. Yes, whoever wants milk should go find their mother. Looking for others is not right. Even toilet paper has to be taken from others. I'm afraid she is so poor that she is crazy. After saying that, everyone looked at each other and exchanged glances and laughed loudly. The situation took a sharp turn. Isabella's face became very ugly. She forced a smile with difficulty and left. I thought Isabella would calm down for a few days. I didn't expect her to be so thick-skinned. In the evening, Isabella sent a message in our building group and at me. Serafina's sister, I have a cold recently and I feel uncomfortable all over. You have nothing to do at home anyway. Can you come to my house and take care of me and the baby? I was simply speechless. What does it have to do with you that I have nothing to do? She still wants me to be her nanny, dream on. Before I had time to furiously curse. My mother-in-law rushed to speak for me, I promised on her behalf. She doesn't go to work now anyway. If she doesn't help with this little favor, is she still a human being? It is said that a distant relative is not as good as a close neighbor. After getting along with neighbors for a long time, they have become one's own relatives. Isn't it right for relatives to help each other? My mother-in-law started to give her speech on being a good neighbor in China again. The replies below were all in line praising her. If it were me, I would also praise. If you praise a few words, you can ask mother-in-law to help here and there. Only a fool wouldn't do such a good thing. I was speechless by my mother-in-law's speech. I suspected that I had depression in my previous life and made my brain stupid. How could I be morally kidnapped by such words and become Isabella's nanny? In my previous life, I didn't go to work because of severe depression. She had a cold and no one took care of her and the baby. My mother-in-law drove me to take care of them. Every day, in addition to breastfeeding the baby, I also had to help her cook, wash clothes, and clean. Isabella lay in bed every day and played with her phone day and night. She didn't take care of the baby when it cried or was hungry. When I went to the hospital to get medicine, Isabella didn't take care of the baby either. She took a nap during the day. With no one taking care of the baby, it crawled outside the balcony by itself. The wind blew the balcony door shut, and the baby was blown and rained on outside the balcony. I only found out that the baby had been locked outside when I came back. That night, the baby developed a high fever. After Isabella's husband came back, in a fit of rage, he pushed me downstairs and I lost my life. Now thinking about it, I'm really like an idiot. Thinking of these things, an idea came to me. With a sly smile on my face, I typed quickly, okay, Isabella, I will come and take good care of you. I also at my mother-in-law in the group and said, Mom, didn't your elder sister-in-law send you a 30-year-old ginseng? Isabella is our relative. She is sick. It's just right to give her the ginseng to nourish her body. Before my mother-in-law could react, Isabella's husband appeared and at my mother-in-law, you old woman are about to be buried. Eating ginseng won't make you live a few more years. My wife is in poor health. You give the ginseng to my wife. I'm on a business trip these days. When I come back and find that my wife is still not well, I will settle accounts with each of you. The group was silent for a minute. My mother-in-law had to reply with a good. I couldn't help laughing heartily. My mother-in-law gave birth to my husband early. She is only 45 years old now. Due to proper maintenance, people outside think she is in her 30s. She is usually most proud of her young face. Today, she was called an old woman again and was told that she is about to be buried. I wonder what expression she has. As for how to take care of Isabella, I will give them a surprise. 06 Early the next morning, I first gave the ginseng to an old grandma. Thinking of my mother-in-law's painful expression when she gave me the ginseng in the morning, I felt extremely satisfied. Mom, you have educated well. Good things should be shared. Next time when elder sister-in-law sends any good things again, you must take them out and share them too. Regardless of how ugly my mother-in-law's expression was, I hummed a tune and went to the next door. I opened the door with a password lock. Isabella and the baby were still sleeping. I went straight to the kitchen, opened the refrigerator, and took away a pile of high-end snacks and ingredients inside. I took them outside and distributed them to neighbors and children downstairs. These are snacks given by Isabella. She said she wants to thank everyone for taking care of her usually. After finishing everything, I went back to Isabella's house. By the way, I sent the photos of distributing delicious food in the building group. The replies below were all praising Isabella for being generous and kind. At this time, Isabella rushed out from the room. Serafina, you did all of this. I had an indifferent expression. Didn't you say that people should be generous? Just because of these snacks, are you angry? Everyone is neighbors. What's wrong with giving some food? Look, they are all praising you in the group. Isabella's face flushed red, but she couldn't get angry at me. She had to suppress herself. Where is the ginseng you said you would bring over yesterday? Give it to me. Even in this situation, she still thinks about someone else's ginseng. It's really funny. I spoke like a green tea. Agatha downstairs is in poor health. I gave the ginseng to her. She needs the ginseng more than you. Isabella stiffened upon hearing this. Then she said angrily, I'm hungry. Go and cook for me. I took out a box of beef-flavored instant noodles, poured hot water for her, and threw it in front of her with a smile and said, the fragrant and rich beef noodle is ready. Eat it. Her face was distorted. You actually gave this patient instant noodles. I blinked. Look, there is meat, vegetables, and noodles here. It's complete in nutrition. What else are you not satisfied with? Besides, anyway, you don't have milk. What's the difference in what you eat? My words immediately provoked her. She suddenly stood up and wanted to hit me. I took the lead and slapped her across the face. Then I picked up the instant noodle box on the table and threw it directly on her head. The soup from the instant noodles flowed all over her face. I also threw the baby's just-changed diaper and slapped it on her face. Now there is not only instant noodle soup on her face but also some stinky yellowish things. Serafina, what's wrong with you? I rolled my eyes speechlessly. You don't know that I'm sick. This illness of mine can attack people at any time. Why did you provoke me? Won't you be angry at me, a patient? I have to go see a doctor now. The doctor said that if I don't go to see a doctor on time, the symptoms will be more serious. I might go even crazier. Saying that, I left happily without looking back. 07 in the evening, I came back from outside in a pleasant mood after eating hot pot. When passing by a hidden small forest in the community, I actually saw my father-in-law and Isabella sitting closely together. I secretly went forward and heard Isabella's coquettish voice ring out, Brother Ashton, taking care of the baby is so tiring recently. Sister Serafina left in the morning. She made me eat instant noodles, slapped me in the face, and poured all the instant noodles on my head. As she spoke, she started crying pitifully, which made my father-in-law very distressed. That crazy woman. I'll scold her when I go back. As for the baby, let that old woman in my family take care of it for you. Isabella turned from crying to smiling and said sweetly, Brother Ashton is still the best. Won't Serafina's mother-in-law be angry? That old woman still goes out every day at this age. She should take care of the baby so that you have time to come out and play with me. After saying that, the two actually kissed each other. It really disgusted me. After kissing for a while, my father-in-law and Isabella left the community together and got in a car. I took a taxi and followed them. The driver was not good and lost them. When I got back home, I saw my mother-in-law taking care of Isabella's baby in a sweat. The baby was crying heartbreakingly and wet my mother-in-law all over. My mother-in-law was very angry when she saw me coming back so late. "Where have you been? Who will take care of Jonathan if you are not here?" I raised the corners of my mouth and showed a sneer. "Whoever takes on the job should take care of it. It's none of my business." Early the next morning, I heard my mother-in-law knocking on the door frantically. My mother-in-law pulled me in a panic and said, "Just now the hospital called and said that your father-in-law has been admitted to the hospital." With a mood of watching the excitement, I drove my mother-in-law to the hospital. When we arrived at the hospital, the doctor showed a difficult expression and said cryptically, "The patient already had high blood pressure." When doing that thing, he fainted due to excessive excitement. My mother-in-law is indeed someone who has seen the big world. She understood what was being said immediately. She was furious and rushed to my father-in-law's hospital bed like crazy and beat his body hard. She picked up the water bottle next to her and smashed it on my father-in-law's face with a clang. My father-in-law was awakened by my mother-in-law's smashing. "You shameless thing. At this age, you still play with women outside. Where can I put my face?" My mother-in-law asked who the shameless woman was, but my father-in-law would rather die than tell. At this time, I sent an anonymous text message to my mother-in-law considerately. My mother-in-law immediately clicked on it. 08 My mother-in-law was so angry that she was about to go crazy. She dragged my father-in-law all the way back to the community. As soon as they arrived outside Isabella's house, they heard Isabella's disgusted voice. "That old thing is obviously no good anymore, and he still asks me if it feels good. I'm so annoyed by that old thing kissing me. His mouth stinks like shit. If it weren't for his little pension, who would be willing to serve him?" My father-in-law's neck flushed red. He broke free from my mother-in-law's hand and pushed the door open with a bang. "You bitch. Yesterday you said on the bed that it was very comfortable. I gave you the old lady's gold necklace and gold bracelet. What's wrong with sleeping with me? The chickens outside are cheaper than you." When Isabella heard my father-in-law comparing her to the chickens outside, her emotions instantly got out of control and she shouted loudly, "Small and soft, and the time is short. If it weren't for your money and gold and silver jewelry, no one would be willing to sleep with you." When my mother-in-law heard that not only did her husband cheat on her, but he also gave her jewelry to his mistress, she was so angry that she had a splitting headache. She rushed up and directly slapped Isabella twice. "You shameless slut. You actually seduced a man who could be your father. If you are so coquettish, why don't you go sell yourself on the street?" When my father-in-law saw that my mother-in-law had beaten Isabella, he was extremely distressed. He stood in front of Isabella and said, "Don't talk nonsense. Isabella and I have a consensual relationship." When my mother-in-law saw that her husband was still protecting Isabella, her eyes turned red with anger. She wanted to rush up and continue beating Isabella. A huge force came from behind and pulled her down to the ground suddenly. My mother-in-law looked up and saw that Alexander had returned. "Alexander is Isabella's husband. You old bastard, dare to hit my wife. I won't let you off." Alexander was furious and punched my mother-in-law in the face several times, making her cry out in pain. I stood behind and trembled. In my previous life, this man pushed me down the stairs and I died. My mother-in-law sat on the ground wailing, "Someone is being beaten to death. Alexander is going to beat someone to death." Neighbors around came out to persuade them to stop fighting one after another. My mother-in-law pointed at Alexander and cursed, "You protect your wife. Your wife is cuckolding you outside. And this shameless slut slept with this old bastard." Isabella's face instantly turned deathly pale. Alexander has a violent temper and beats her up when he is unhappy. People around started whispering. This completely enraged Alexander. He grabbed Isabella's head and smashed it against the wall. Soon Isabella was beaten until her head was bleeding. Isabella, with blood all over her head, begged for mercy in a mournful voice. I was forced by Brother Ashton. He gave me a lot of money. I'll give it all to you. Now Alexander was even angrier. Isn't this saying that he is incapable of making money? He kicked Isabella hard to the ground and kicked her in the stomach wildly. Seeing my father-in-law, who was trembling like a sieve, standing beside him, he picked up the tennis racket next to him and hit him crazily with all his strength. Soon there was blood. Isabella's screams, Alexander's curses, and my parents-in-law's screams intertwined to form the most moving music. I closed my eyes and enjoyed it for a while before I dared to peek out from home secretly. When I really saw Alexander, my heart still pounded with fear. Some neighbors called an ambulance and took away Isabella and my father-in-law, who had already fainted. Out of guilt, in the face of the police called by the doctor, they insisted that they had fallen by themselves. Alexander escaped punishment and beat Isabella at home every day. Isabella's wailing could be heard throughout the building. After my father-in-law was discharged from the hospital, he could only lie in bed and recuperate. My mother-in-law ignored him and sometimes didn't even give him food. My father-in-law was so hungry that he was only skin and bones. One night, the door was knocked loudly. After my mother-in-law opened the door, Alexander viciously dragged my mother-in-law to the room where my father-in-law was lying. He threw my mother-in-law on the ground. He walked to the bed and pinched my father-in-law's neck. "You slept with my wife. Then give me your wife to sleep with, okay?" Seeming to ask, his eyes were full of threats. My father-in-law nodded frantically. My mother-in-law was ashen-faced beside him. I was in the next room, hearing my mother-in-law's screams and cries, and my father-in-law was too scared to make a sound. I felt extremely happy in my heart. After Alexander left, my mother-in-law wanted to call the police and gritted her teeth. "I will make this beast pay the price." Just now, the father-in-law, who was so frightened that he almost lost control in front of Alexander, became tough at this time. His neck flushed red and he shouted loudly, "You have the nerve to publicize such an ugly matter. Do you want me to never be able to hold my head up again?" The mother-in-law was furious and shrieked curses. "If it weren't for you having an affair with that bitch Isabella, I wouldn't have gone through all this." After saying that, she picked up the fly swatter beside her and beat the father-in-law wildly. The father-in-law was beaten so hard that he couldn't even stand up. With so many things happening at home, my husband finally came back from other places. Since my baby passed away, he has never returned to this home. As soon as he entered the house, he slapped me in the face. I was caught off guard. But he said, "Serafina, you are a disaster. Not only did you kill our child, but you also made our family in turmoil. If you had agreed to breastfeed Jonathan, my mother wouldn't have been violated and my father wouldn't have been beaten and hospitalized. Don't you have depression? Why don't you jump off a building? If I were you, I wouldn't have the face to live in this world." Extremely speechless. People who belong to the same family are alike. Ashton's ability to morally kidnap, misplace blame and stab me in the heart is exactly like his mother's. I wonder if I was blind back then. How could I have fallen for such a man? I picked up the tennis racket beside me and gave Ashton a blow. He was hit so hard that he squatted on the ground in pain. "Your parents agreed to things without my consent. Why should I do it?" Ashton stuck out his neck and said righteously, "My mother's business is your business. You were so understanding before. Why are you so cold-blooded now?" I said coldly, "I was deceived by you all because I was blind before. It is the biggest fool to wrong myself to help others." Ashton was so angry that his eyes rolled back. "It has always been like this. They pretend to be generous and use my things to do favors. I was cowardly before and let it happen. Now they still want to morally kidnap me." Daydreaming. Seeing that he couldn't persuade me, Ashton's face was full of gloom. At this time, when the mother-in-law saw her son who had returned home, she quickly threw herself on her son, wailing loudly, "Son, that bitch next door seduced your father. I was also insulted by that damn guy and her family. Your father won't let me call the police. Your mother has been bullied terribly. You must stand up for your mother." While talking, she wiped her nose and tears on her son. Ashton pushed his mother away with a look of disgust and shouted loudly, "Call the police? Aren't you afraid that our family will lose enough face? If it weren't for you dressing so revealingly and going to dance parties every day and being violated by other men? I think you deserve it. My father is so old. What's wrong with having fun with other women? You made it known to everyone. Where can our family put our face?" The mother-in-law was completely stunned. She was extremely disappointed. She didn't expect that her beloved son would not help her at all and even blame her. The father-in-law was lying on the bed, pounding the bed crazily, "Hee, worthy of being my son." When Ashton heard his father's laughter, the veins on his face bulged and he rushed up and slapped him twice. "There are so many prostitutes outside. Who can't you sleep with? How dare you sleep with Isabella?" The father-in-law's ears were ringing from the beating. Looking at his son with a fierce face, he sighed and begged for mercy. The whole family ended up in discord. I ate and drank as usual and was not affected at all. Just when I was sleeping drowsily, a burst of noise woke me up. A figure rushed into my room. I faced him directly. As if back in a previous life, he stared at me viciously, his eyes full of malicious calculations. Isabella stood beside Alexander, her face bruised and swollen, and shouted loudly, "Husband, it's her who didn't breastfeed Jonathan." Alexander stared at me firmly and said viciously, "It's you, this bitch, who didn't feed Jonathan and made him go to the hospital. He got sick because he had no milk to drink. It cost 30,000 yuan. You have to pay us back. You also have to pay me for lost wages, mental distress compensation, and nutrition expenses. Altogether, it's 100,000 yuan. Crazy couple." But I was afraid of him. I didn't dare to confront him head-on, so I had to endure humiliation. "I don't have so much money now. Can I pay less?" Alexander raised the corner of his eye and showed a lewd smile. "If you don't have money, it's also okay. Let me have fun and I'll let you go." Facing Alexander's threat and insult, I felt extreme fear and anger. I tried to beg for mercy, hoping that he would let me go. "Please, don't do this. I beg you." But Alexander was unmoved. His eyes became even more sinister and the smile on the corner of his mouth became even more hideous. He reached out and tore my clothes. I struggled desperately. He suddenly raised his hand and gave me a hard slap. I was so dizzy from the beating that my cheek was burning with pain. "You bitch, still dare to resist?" While scolding, Alexander pounced on me again. Instinctively, I covered my head and closed my eyes, waiting for the upcoming blow. But just then, there was a sudden rush of footsteps outside the door. Immediately after, the door was kicked open and several policemen rushed in. Isabella was the first to react and shouted loudly, "Uncle policeman, we were just playing." Alexander's face showed a panicked expression. His smugness was replaced by panic. "No. She seduced me." I pointed to the mobile phone that had been recording on the flower shelf. Everything was recorded. Fortunately, I called the police in advance. Alexander took advantage of the policeman's inattention and kicked Isabella to the ground. "Stupid woman, go and kowtow to ask her for a letter of understanding." I was speechless and shocked. Asking for forgiveness and letting his own wife do it. If I go to jail and there is no one to earn money, my wife and children will starve to death. Can you bear it? I curled my lips and said impatiently, "Whether your child lives or dies has nothing to do with me. I didn't give birth to it. You have guts. Wait until I get out and I'll kill you." Alexander's anger was clearly visible on his face. The policeman reprimanded him loudly when he heard it. Alexander was administratively detained for 15 days. With Alexander not at home, Ashton was extremely attentive and frequently ran to Isabella's house. Under the pretext that she was a lying-in woman and couldn't be without someone to take care of. After I gave birth, he had never taken care of me. He took boxes and boxes of high-end fruits, supplements, and milk powder to Isabella's house. I just said that I didn't have enough fruit to eat either and asked him not to take so much. He glared at me angrily. "You caused her husband to be put in jail. She is now alone and helpless and needs the care of our neighbors. Ashton almost had the words "I have an affair with Isabella" written all over his face. I was really blind in my previous life and didn't notice that there was something fishy between the two of them. When I went downstairs to take out the trash, I found that Isabella's door was slightly ajar. Suddenly, the sound of a slap was heard, and then Ashton's voice rang out, "You are so cheap. You can sleep with my dad even at his age." Isabella covered her face, her eyes were red and swollen, looking pitiful and aggrieved. "Your dad found out about our affair. He said that if I don't sleep with him, he will tell Alexander. I'm afraid that if Alexander finds out, both of us will be beaten to death." Ashton sneered and glanced at Isabella. "What a joke. I'm not afraid of him." Isabella hugged Ashton like a boneless person, her plump body rubbing against him, and there were continuous moans. "Jonathan is my child. He is the only descendant of 3 generations in my Ashton family. I can't stand others saying that Alexander, that idiot, is his father anymore." "Isabella, Jonathan is not your only child. Don't you have a daughter?" Ashton snorted a few times. "Daughters are all money losers. Whoever has one is unlucky. That stupid woman still thinks her daughter is dead. We sold her to the countryside and made a lot of money." Standing outside the door, my heart was filled with a huge wave of shock. Anger and shock intertwined into a raging flame. My daughter is actually not dead. Ashton, this beastly thing, actually sold his own biological daughter for money. It was only after I married into the Ashton family that I learned that they favor sons over daughters. After I gave birth to a daughter, no one was happy. My mother-in-law was eager for me to get pregnant with a second child. But the doctor said that there was something wrong with my body and I couldn't have another child. After giving birth, my body was very weak and I also suffered from postpartum depression. They told me that my daughter had died of illness. I didn't even see my daughter's body. After my daughter died, Ashton was very indifferent to me. He blamed me, as a mother, for not taking good care of the child. The unit needed someone to go on a long business trip. He signed up without hesitation, abandoning me, whose depression was getting worse. If it weren't for the fact that I still had some money and I had contributed most of the family's expenses, he would have divorced me long ago. I didn't expect him to be so cruel and even sell his own biological daughter for money. Yes, after his daughter was born, he didn't come to take care of her even once. What kind of feelings could he have? When I bought branded daily necessities for my daughter, he sarcastically said, "Daughters are all money losers. They don't deserve such expensive things." I can only blame myself for being blind and trusting this vicious man by mistake. Inside, the two people were already intertwined, and the moans continued to ring out. I endured nausea with great effort, took pictures. Walking out of the unit building, the warm sunlight pierced through the haze in my heart. I clenched my fist tightly, and a flame of revenge burned in my heart. My daughter is still alive. I will definitely find her back. And those who have hurt my daughter, none of them will escape. I spent a lot of money to hire a private detective to help me find my daughter. And I quietly did a paternity test between Jonathan and Ashton, waiting to give Alexander a surprise on the day he is released. Unexpectedly, on the day Alexander was released, my mother-in-law gave me a surprise first. In the past few days, my mother-in-law often had a low fever, was sleepy, had night sweats, nausea and vomiting. She went to the hospital for an examination and got the results in the morning. After coming back, she kept a straight face and didn't say a word. I happened to see the examination results that were thrown in the trash can. HIV positive. My father-in-law shouted and wanted to eat spare ribs. My mother-in-law rushed up and wanted to hit my father-in-law. My father-in-law pushed her to the ground and shouted, "Dead old woman, are you crazy because of Alexander? What are you doing?" My mother-in-law's face changed. She got up, opened the door and rushed out. My father-in-law didn't care where my mother-in-law went. Suddenly, there was a tragic scream from Isabella next door. My father-in-law's face changed and he quickly ran to the next door. I slowly walked to the next door. Isabella's door was wide open, and heart-wrenching cries came from inside. Neighbors around were also curious and opened their doors to see. I followed the neighbors and walked in. I saw Isabella leaning in my father-in-law's arms, crying so hard that she couldn't catch her breath. My mother-in-law stood on the balcony and laughed crazily, looking down frequently and kept murmuring, "Fall to death, fall to death." Beatrice curiously walked onto the balcony and looked down following my mother-in-law's gaze. After a scream, she was so frightened that she fell to the ground and pointed tremblingly outside the balcony. Jonathan was thrown to death. The neighbors were extremely shocked. No one expected that Grandma Serafina, who is usually warm-hearted, would actually throw a little baby from the 18th floor. The neighbor's exclamation brought Isabella back to her senses. She broke free from her father-in-law's arms and rushed towards Grandma Serafina. She picked up a vase nearby and smashed it on Grandma Serafina's head. Grandma Serafina was bleeding profusely. Neighbors around came to pull them apart one after another. At this time, Alexander returned from the police station. Hearing that his son had been thrown downstairs and died, his eyes were wide with rage and he let out a roar. He ran into the kitchen and came out with a long knife in his hand. The neighbors all knew his violent temper. When he got angry, he could beat people to death. They wanted to run, but Alexander blocked the door and no one could escape. Alexander asked them to hand over Grandma Serafina. No one dared to resist him. The usually harmonious and friendly neighbors pushed Grandma Serafina out. Grandma Serafina cried heartbreakingly and knelt on the ground with a thud, knocking her head loudly and begging wildly. Alexander pointed the kitchen knife at Grandma Serafina. "You old hag, you killed my son. You will pay the price." Grandma Serafina knocked her head even louder. "As long as you let me go, I can give you anything." Alexander showed a greedy smile. "Prepare 5 million for me first." Grandma Serafina's expression changed. Where did she have 5 million? Alexander was forcing her to die. Before Grandma Serafina could say anything, Isabella got up from the ground and cried and wanted to hit Alexander. "Has your conscience been eaten by dogs? Are you still a human being? Your son is dead. Instead of avenging him, you still think of making money from him. If the son is gone, you can have another one. Your son can exchange so much money. It's a good death and a wonderful death." At this time, Ashton appeared. When he knew that Jonathan had been thrown to death by Grandma Serafina, he went crazy. He shouted and made a fuss, smashing things and kicking doors and walls wildly, looking even more sad than Jonathan's real father. The neighbors exchanged glances and their expressions were extremely colorful. I secretly watched him from the side. Knowing the truth, I felt that the depression in my chest had dissipated a lot. At this time, a courier came to the door. He said there was a courier for Alexander. Alexander received this inexplicable courier. When he opened it, there were photos of Ashton and Isabella hugging and kissing naked, and the paternity report of Jonathan and Ashton. His emotions completely lost control and he stared at Ashton with bloodshot eyes. "You are Jonathan's wild father. You even slept with Isabella, this bitch. I actually raised someone else's son. You all deserve to die." He roared and was about to stab Ashton with the knife in his hand. Seeing that he couldn't dodge in time, Ashton pulled Grandma Serafina beside him without hesitation and used her as a shield. Blood spurted out instantly. Grandma Serafina turned her head with difficulty and witnessed her son's expression of relief. Her eyes were full of shock, sadness, despair and utter hopelessness. The son she loved as a treasure. When she was young, she gave up her career to take good care of her son. She was domestically abused by her husband. In order to give her son a complete family, she endured and didn't get divorced. But her son, when his life was threatened, pulled her as a human shield without hesitation. Grandma Serafina fell to the ground covered in blood. She groaned in pain a few times and soon lost her breath. Ashton suddenly came to his senses. In front of him was his mother lying in a pool of blood. The pain of losing his mother swept over him belatedly. He let out a earth-shattering roar. His voice was so sharp that it seemed to tear the air. He suddenly picked up a vase nearby and, with all his strength, smashed it at Alexander, who was laughing wildly. But the vase only grazed Alexander and fell to the ground and broke into pieces. Ashton was burning with anger. He squatted down and tremblingly pulled out the blood-stained knife from Grandma Serafina's body with his hands. He roared, with full of anger and grief, and rushed towards Alexander brandishing the knife. In the chaotic fight, Alexander reacted quickly and snatched the knife from Ashton's hand. With a backhand swing, the tip of the knife quickly and fiercely stabbed into Ashton's abdomen. Ashton felt a sharp pain. His body was penetrated by the cold blade. Alexander looked at him insanely, quickly pulled out the knife and stabbed it in again hard. Ashton's shrill screams echoed throughout the room. Soon, the sound stopped abruptly and everything returned to dead silence. At this time, someone shouted, "The police are here." The police rushed into the scene. In front of them were two corpses lying in a pool of blood. Alexander was subdued on the spot by the police. The court sentenced him to death and executed immediately. After experiencing so many things in succession, Isabella's spirit completely collapsed. Her family's property was auctioned by the court. The proceeds from the auction were used as compensation for the deaths of Grandma Serafina and Ashton. After the death compensation came down, the father-in-law wanted to embezzle all the compensation. He pushed all the faults of this to me. The father-in-law pulled down the corners of his mouth. "You are a jinx. You have ruined our family like this. If you had been willing to breastfeed Isabella at the beginning, there would not have been what happened later. Give me all the compensation. In addition, give me 500,000 as compensation for my loss." He didn't think at all that it was because he and Ashton had an affair with Isabella that there was what happened later. I showed a sarcastic smile and said coldly, "You still want compensation? You go to jail first. You sold my child back then. Don't you think I don't know? I have reported it to the public security." When the father-in-law heard my words, a trace of surprise appeared on his face. He rushed out of the house in a flustered manner and encountered the crazy Isabella downstairs. Isabella hugged her father-in-law tightly and kept murmuring, "Child, my child." The father-in-law pushed Isabella away with a look of disgust and wanted to leave. But he didn't notice a trace of viciousness flashing in Isabella's eyes. Suddenly, she took out a fruit knife from her bag. With lightning speed, she thrust it forcefully into her father-in-law's body. "Revenge." Sister said to take revenge for the baby. Isabella laughed insanely. I stood on the second floor and watched all this happen quietly, revealing a relieved smile. The people who harmed me and my daughter in my previous life finally got their retribution. Due to mental illness, Isabella was not sentenced. Later, neighbors said that Isabella often wandered in the nearby park, and her stomach gradually grew bigger, but no one knew who the father of the child was. I got all the compensation and sold the house in this community. With the help of the police, I found my daughter. From then on, my daughter and I started a new life. I hugged her tightly, hugging my lost and recovered treasure. I took my daughter on an overseas vacation, and my depression is also slowly getting better. Lying on a beach chair and looking at the blue sea, I feel an unprecedented sense of relaxation and comfort. I think this is my real rebirth at this moment. Earth 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 at this moment.